Okay, good morning everyone. It is now 9:30 and so I resume the hearing. First of all, Carol, could I ask you to deliver your housekeeping messages for one final time?
Good morning. Same as the rest of the examination, there's no programmed fire alarm test, so if the alarm does sound, please make your way to the nearest exit and gather on the corner of Claremont Terrace, which is outside the G&B building, which is just to your left as you go out the main doors. Do not stop to retrieve any belongings, but exit the building as quickly and safely as possible, following the green exit routes. And do not enter the building until a fire marshal or member of the fire brigade tells you it's safe to do so. The main doors for use are the big ones at the front. For security purposes, do not use the side doors unless you're a wheelchair user and there's someone available to unlock the doors again after you. Just to make people aware, there are other building users in the building, so just be mindful of that. The toilets are situated on the ground floor, just down at the back of that corridor. Drinking water is available on the tables, but for people in the public area, seating area upstairs, there's water available in the foyer. Other refreshments that are available from coffee shops and places to eat on Gilligate. There's also a Sainsbury's Express on both of them, and also there's now a Tesco's just down the road on Gilligate, but they don't have a coffee machine. Also, filming, the proceedings are being filmed, so if anybody has any issues about being on camera, if you let me know and I can put you in a location that you're not picked up on camera. Wi-Fi, Citadel guest, and password is General Booth 1883, and those are written on the posters at either side of the building, along with my contact details. Thank you.
And in the interests of fairness, I should probably say that other retail outlets are available. Thank you for that, Carol. I think, and you know, just for the hell of it, let us have one last time some very brief introductions, starting, if we may, with you, Mr. Henderson.
So, thank you very much. Good morning. Matthew Henderson on behalf of the City of York Council.
Sarah Dormer-Mode, Local Plan Project Officer.
Alison Stockdale, Policy Officer for the City of York Council.
Julian Ridge, Sustainable Transport Manager for City of York Council.
Catherine Dukes, Directions Planning.
Dave Merritt, representing York Labour Party, York Environment Forum and York and District Trades Union Council.
Good morning, Andrew Morrison, York Civic Trust.
Thank you very much all. Good morning and welcome to the last day of the scheduled hearings for Phase 4. I don't think that I probably need to explain to anybody, unless you ask, unless there are any questions about the kind of procedure that we'll be using today. But just in case, you know, if you do want to come into the discussion at any point, please append your nameplate, and I will bring you in. So let us turn then, first of all, to matter 12. That is the General Development Management Policies, being policies DP1 through to DP4, policy DM1 and policy SS1. And what I'm going to do quite simply is to take those things in turn, starting with policy DP1. Mr. Henderson.
Sir, thank you very much. I don't propose to make much by way of submissions on this policy. You will see from the hard copy that we hopefully placed on each person's desk this morning, the changes, such as they are highlighted for you, and they are very minor in respect of this policy. It is only that first paragraph, Roman numeral 1, and that is an updating matter given local circumstances and how matters have moved on, and we've talked about all of this since this policy was first drafted. I don't think I need to say any more about that, unless Mr. Mulroy. No, I think that's everything from us on DP1, so we'll take the rest as read.
Thank you for that, Mr. Henderson. Is anyone here to talk about policy DP1 this morning? Okay, very good. Yeah, we don't have any specific questions that we wanted to ask about that either, so we will take it as insofar as we have it in writing. Let us go then very quickly to policy DP2.
Thank you, sir. DP2 is slightly more extensive in its revisions, although I think all of them are ones which you have heard from us or been alerted to from us at previous hearings. But for convenience, Mr Mahmood will briefly talk through each of those. And again, they're highlighted in yellow. It actually starts on the second page of this policy, but we'll take you through those now.
So the primary changes that you see there are changes agreed with the Environment Agency and formalised through a statement of common ground which relate to the Water Directive framework. You'll also see a additional bullet point that has been added in relation to mitigation and adaptation to climate change in that section, and that was reflected in our Phase 2 Matter 8 statement as well, where that was proposed, and revisions to supporting text make reference to this change to. That's the extent of the changes to policy DP2.
So on that basis, it's, I trust, all self-explanatory, but if there's any points that arise, we'll deal with those now.
I'm tempted to ask precisely what the word geomorphology means, but I'm sure that I can look that up. Is anyone here to talk about policy DP2? Mr Morrison.
Thank you, sir. It's a point around effectiveness when it comes to soundness of DP2, and also a point of principle about development management principles, setting out a broad statement that's then picked up by further policies further down. In DP2, we were a little concerned that it was a bit weak on health and well-being, when actually there are some specific policies, as you know fine well, HW1 to 7, that actually pick that up in detail, but nothing within DP2 that really brings that into the conversation. So our suggestion was that within the bullet points under section II in DP2, there might be an inclusion that it should reference support, that the development principles will support communities' health, social and cultural well-being under that subheading. And that would allow those further policies, HW1, HW7 and D3, to then be introduced and bring some further detail into it. So we just thought that was something that was missing from DP2.
One from Mr Mahmood.
So the policy as drafted does refer to community needs broadly, which is intended to catch those policies in the detailed section of the plan which relate to health and well-being specifically.
Does that mean that you don't want to take Mr Morrison up on his suggestion?
We don't think it's necessary to include it, as it's covered in detail later in the policy and is captured by policy DP2. If, sir, you think it would be helpful to include that, we don't think it's a soundness matter, but reference could be worked in. We don't.
I would politely disagree, of course. I think it does go to soundness in terms of effectiveness, because actually I think introducing those things explicitly in that, without trying to get them under a catch-all phrase, would make the plan make the plan more sound. But that's I'm happy with that.
And that can't possibly be right, because we don't need any introductory words here in order for those policies, which went through yesterday with virtually no comment from the Civic Trust, to operate effectively. It simply would add absolutely nothing for the purposes of soundness and effectiveness. It's at best presentational.
You disagree? Okay, noted. I don't expect people to leave this room in happy agreement, so that's absolutely fine. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, Mr Morrison, on that? Okay, Mr Merritt.
Yes, I'd draw your attention to our written submissions on behalf of the Labour Party and behalf of York Environment Forum, which are basically the same. Obviously, some of those arguments refer to matters that we've touched on in earlier phases, which we'll obviously await your decisions and views on. But there were some additional issues here that we wanted to raise in terms of the wording issues, in terms of the points that we make on page 2 and page 3 of our written submission. In terms of the transport issues, the importance of referring to the hierarchy of transport users. We've had one in York for a couple of decades now. Interesting to see that the government is now adopting very, very similar hierarchy in the more recent national transport policy publications. And we think that's quite important in terms of, in effect, setting the approach that needs to be undertaken in new development in terms of how we deal with the transport aspects of it, and that it reinforces what is in the NPPF, but also in some of the PPGs that support it. We also think that in terms of the highway network capacity, there needs to be appropriate qualifications in terms of just proceeding on that without a full appraisal of its economic, social and environmental and carbon impacts and the carbon implications, given the massive challenge that we have to achieve the net zero targets of both government and the local York ones. I'd also just make a small point that the document tabled today with the modifications to DP2 didn't actually, those modifications didn't actually appear in the council's written submission or in their major modifications document.
I'm really sorry, I didn't quite follow. Can Mr. Merritt explain what he thinks has been omitted? And
the modification, you published modifications to DP2 in the document you tabled here. They weren't actually in your written statement. And I checked the major modifications document and they weren't in there either. So it's the first time we've seen them, but I don't have a problem with them, but I don't, that's...
Sure, yeah, there are a couple. Ms. Dillman-Moody can highlight them if it's necessary, but there are a few extras in the usual way as we've looked at matter statements and taken on board what people have said, and we will include those as part of the modifications that will be consulted on in due course. I mean, unless there's an issue that's been raised, I don't propose to address that part of the submissions any further.
Yeah. But slipping things in at the last minute is really doesn't make it easy for us.
So just on that point, those modifications were set out in our Phase 2 Matter 8 and Matter 1 hearing statements, and I apologise that they were omitted for completeness in this phase's hearing statements, but that's why we provided the hard copies so people would have those conveniently to hand.
Okay.
On the other points, the hierarchy, firstly, I'll ask Mr. Ridge just to make a brief comment on the hierarchy and its inclusion here.
Of course, we've taken the view that the hierarchy is referred to in the transport policies of the local plan, and because the hierarchy is included within LTP3 and there are references to LTP3 within policies T1 to T9, that it is adequately referenced.
So in short, sir, we don't need to make that amendment for the purposes of soundness. It would be duplicated and those matters dealt with more appropriately elsewhere. The other substantive comment was on the issue of highway capacity. We don't accept that there needs to be a change in the way that is proposed by the Labour Party and those others who Mr. Merritt represents. Those projects, as they come forward, will of course comply insofar as they have to with EIA and indeed any other policies within the plan, insofar as they are development within the scope of this plan, and that will capture all of those matters which Mr. Merritt has raised in his proposed amendment. Insofar as there are strategic highway capacity issues which fall outside of development control and this plan, then it's not for this plan to dictate how they would come forward. So in short, we don't need it. We've captured everything that has been raised in that proposed amendment.
If I could just come back about the hierarchy, yes, I accept it is in the LTP3, which we have, I think, in other locations, in other hearings, recognised is considerably dated, and therefore the weight that developers might put on it might not be what it should be. But the point about the hierarchy is it doesn't just influence the transport provisions, it also influences the design of developments if you are going to effectively achieve that radical shift that's required. And therefore I think it is important that it is there up front in the local plan if we are going to effectively deliver the ambitions of the plan in this regard.
I disagree. I don't think this goes to soundness because LTP3 is valid until 2031. So whilst it is a document that's 10 years old, it is entirely valid within the statutory policy framework that the Council uses to determine development negotiations with developers. Yeah, I think it's also dealt with within Policy T1 and DP2.
Can you just remind me, Mr. Rich, does Policy T1, I think you said, refer to the hierarchy?
Policy T1, can I just borrow my colleague's local plan, which, unlike mine, won't fall open at Policy T1. So where are we? Section 14. Yes, so Policy T1 is about sustainable transport and sustainable access, and the explanatory text links it to LTP3. Specifically, it makes the point that the transport policies of this local plan are consistent with the strategic themes of the City of York Council Local Transport Plan 3, 2011 to 2031.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand what role the hierarchy plays in the council's discussions and negotiations with developers. So
normally it would determine the provision that we see for the sites. So for York Central, I suppose, which is a bit of a worked example in the sense that the Section 106 agreement for that has been concluded, it informed the very strong focus that we put within that site on sustainable transport links, so providing very high quality cycle route along the access road, linking that in with both the on-road and the off-road network, high quality facilities for pedestrians, very good provision of bus services and bus stops and shelters. So we would tend to apply that and say, well, actually, our preference in line with LTP3 is that the site is, as many trips within site and to and from the site take place by sustainable modes. So the first thing is to make sure that they are accommodated, and then you would ensure that the infrastructure is there and then accommodate vehicle trips after that.
Okay, so in effect, having set out the hierarchy provides the council with a tool, in effect, to gain through developments the types of provision that it wants in line with the hierarchy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely how it works, and it's very useful because it's a very clear statement of our policy. Because when you're negotiating Section 106 agreements with developers, and sometimes there is a tendency to say, perhaps because they're more familiar with other parts of the country where there isn't this focus, they might say, well, is it really necessary to provide this cycle facility? Is it really necessary to provide these bus services? So, well, no, actually our policy commitment is that we favour those modes, and therefore it is absolutely essential, and here is our modal hierarchy in LTP3 that shows how we go about that.
So I think the word you use, tool, is important. It's a tool within that overarching strategy, and it forms part of those negotiations with developers on a site-specific basis. It's not applied as a policy, and it would be odd if it was applied as a sort of policy. It needs to inform the discussions as the development comes forward in the way that Mr. Ridge has described. Hence why we say it's best located where it is, i.e. within the suite of the wider issues in LPT3, with the appropriate cross-reference that we've already drawn your attention to.
Yeah, I suppose I was just wondering whether it would be helpful to the council to have it in this plan, given that it's this plan against which decisions on planning applications would be made, rather than against what's in LTP.
So we understand that. If, and insofar as we were going to look at doing so, we probably do that via an amendment to, sorry, just let me give you the right reference.
DP3.
Yeah, to DP3, Roman numeral X, rather than DP2, which is being proposed. If you look at DP3, Roman numeral X, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead slightly. That deals specifically with promoting integration, connectivity and accessibility to, from, and within the site by maximising opportunities for ... Essentially, it's capturing very much what Mr. Ridge has described to you. We're not going to have any difficulties with a reference to the hierarchy, perhaps within the supporting text that follows, paragraph 220 to that policy. That would be an amendment that the council would be comfortable with, and if that's something that would achieve what you've just suggested.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that making a direct reference, a direct link between this plan and the hierarchy set out in the LTP would assist with the effectiveness of this plan.
Okay, so we hear everything you say on that. So we will take that away for paragraph 220 to include probably only a sentence or two in the manner that you've just suggested, and we can include that as part of the modifications.
I think, well, the only thing I would add is that we're expecting to publish a new local transport plan in line with government guidance in 2024, which will be a mandatory document. So we need to be a bit careful about ossifying it. It's possible that the modal hierarchy might be different if, for instance, central government specifies a new modal hierarchy, which is different I think in principle it'd be very similar to ours, but it might be different in detail.
Yeah, I suspect that could be dealt with in the way that you word what is to be added to paragraph 2.20.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So we'll come up with a suitable form of words that deals with the concern and at the same time addresses the issue you've raised.
Mr. Merritt.
Can I express my appreciation to yourself, sir, and to the council in that regard? Can I just make one final point? The point, the answers Mr. Ridge gave to you highlighted that the use of the hierarchy in dealing with the transport aspects of planning applications. As I said in my earlier comments, we see it as a twofold function. It also should inform the layout of major new developments in terms of being able to encourage walking, cycling and so on. So I'd appreciate if it's possible within the supporting text that the council produces that important link is flagged as well, please.
Yes, so I'm afraid I'm going to resist any suggestion we need to go further, because that, in my submission, is really captured when one looks at those parts of DP3 that I highlighted, but also indeed those parts of DP3 that sit around that paragraph, read against what we then include in later parts of the plan around the allocations and about the design policies. That's all covered. We're moving beyond what might be necessary to raise the issue and to address the issue into essentially matters of detail that go beyond these policies.
Anything else on that point, Mr. Merritt? Okay, thank you. Is there anything else on... it might feel as though we're talking about DP3 already, but before we do go there formally, is there anything else on policy DP2? Okay, policy DP3 then.
Sir, there's a very minor change, proposals to policies map in the opening paragraph. Other than that, there are no changes proposed. I don't have anything to say further at this stage, and we'll deal with any points made in the discussion.
Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, sir. Just to say at the outset, we strongly support the principles laid out by the Council in DP3. Our issue is around the use of the phrase historic character by itself, and we think it goes towards the consistency with national policy. Whilst we welcome the emphasis on enhancing and respecting historic character, we don't think it's strong enough, and there's no definition within NPPF 12 of historic character, where there are definitions of historic environment and heritage assets. And we think the addition of those two terms that are well defined within NPPF and well established as accepted terms, in addition to historic character, or to replace historic character in principles Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 3, would actually make the DP3 more sound, would make it sound and more compliant with national policy. So it's just and we think it's that point. This is at the outset. We would like to make sure that the plan is as strong as it can be on protecting and enhancing the heritage.
Is that, Mr. Morrison, because I'm just trying to, well, I just want to be absolutely sure that that I fully get your point. Do you say that, is it the word character, frankly, and is it because the things that need to be respected and enhanced in relation to the historic environment might not necessarily, or they might go beyond character?
Yes, sir. It's exactly that. It's the fact that, you know, and the historic environment and heritage assets are very well defined with MPPF and go beyond a sense of what a character might be, which we think is a little bit subjective. So it's just to reinforce those two principles by using terminology from MPPF.
Yeah, what does the council think about that?
So the MPPF terminology referred to is of course dealt with in the design policies of the plan where we make explicit reference to this. I think historic character in this context is intended to be, again, broader and to capture those elements, but also wider elements of the historic character of the city. I don't think so. This is a soundness point, and I don't know that changes would necessarily even add clarity when we look at this policy in combination with the design policies in later sections of the plan.
Put it like this, historic environment isn't omitted, it's actually within the historic character of York. I think there was a concern raised by Mr. Moss about assets. Well, plainly those assets are part of what makes York special. It's part of its character. Indeed, if one just on the other side of the page looks at what we said in DP2, conserve, maintain and enhance the environment. And of course, at the very top of that list, we've got conserve and where appropriate enhance those elements which contribute to the special character and setting of the historic city. We see the historic character here as encompassing all of those matters in the historic environment, but actually being slightly wider because of those interrelationships and because of the way in which York is developed and which permeates not just assets listed or otherwise, but also tackles matters such as purposeful when we're dealing with the Greenbelt. Historic character comes into play there, and we think that's the best term to capture all of those different components in this special context of York.
Anything further on that, Mr. Morrison? Mr. Merritt?
As we indicated in our written submission, we're concerned that there has been some watering down of the NPF policies in the actual York plan. Introductions of where possible, and we'd like to see those where possibles deleted, and the firmer words that are in the NPF used in the York policies, and we'd be we're supportive of the perhaps more comprehensive comments that the Civic Trust has made on their issues in their response to this question.
Yeah, just to help me out, Mr. Merritt, where specifically, which references to where possible were you alluding to there?
In DP3 11, it refers to the impact of residual car trips on the highways mitigate the impact of residual car trips on the highway network where possible, including addressing air quality issues. And we'd like to see the deletion of that, but also at the beginning of that same paragraph, what is suggested is to use the words actively manage development to minimise the environmental impact of vehicle trips. And then there's also DP3, where we think there could be stronger wording. So at the beginning to say, ensure integration, connectivity and accessibility to, and then in the second half of that sentence, and achieving a modal shift from the car to more sustainable and healthier forms of travel.
So let's deal with the where possible in paragraph 11. We say that's appropriate in this context. When one's dealing with the highway network, there will be some pieces of mitigation that are within within the hands of the developer, others within the hands of the local planning authority, and some within the hands of National Highways. It requires partnership working between all three. Where possible is an appropriate reflection of that here and the flexibility that will be needed on a case-by-case basis. No changes needed, therefore, in my submission to that part of this policy. As to the next point, which deals with the preceding paragraph, we don't accept that there's any inconsistency with the NPPF using the language of promotion and the language of facilitating. Certainly nothing that goes to the issue of soundness. It's really quite clear what this policy is seeking to achieve, and it does so in very positive terms. Nothing further is required in our submission for the reasons of soundness.
Okay, is there then anything else on policy DP3? Okay, very good, thank you. Let us go then to DP4.
So there are no changes proposed to this policy. You have it before you. I don't need to say anything further unless points are made in the discussion.
Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, sir. As far as we're aware, DP4 is based on guidance from MPPF 12, particularly para 14. MPPF 21 revision has redefined some of this guidance in para 11, and we wanted to take into importance of climate change as well as protection of further protection of the historic environment. And we wondered whether actually the second bullet point, specified policies in that framework indicate that development should be restricted, should actually be updated to be more, from our reading, more in line with MPPF 21 to reference paras 11 and 181 and footnotes 768. It just feels that MPPF, the draft local plan and national policy have got a little bit out of line here. So it's just whether referencing MPPF 21 revisions would strengthen, in terms of consistency with national policy, that second bullet point within DP4.
So the words you have there, that second bullet point, they are verbatim from para 14 of the 2012 framework. They capture essentially the same point that reoccurs in the final bullet point of what is now paragraph 11 of the 2021 NPPF. The footnote is changed in terms of its numbering, but it captures the same matters: habitats, green belts, local green space, AONBs, heritage coasts, national parks, all the Broads, designated heritage assets, flooding, coastal erosion. So in my submission, the answer is no, that doesn't need to change. This is a sort of either-or option. We either have this policy and it reflects paragraph 14, or we simply strike it through altogether. The council sees this as a kind of black and white issue. Frankly, we would go either way at this point on it, but it's in there, and it either stays in as it does so, or it comes out. What I would resist a mashup of paragraphs 14 and 11.
Yes. How shall I put this? Applying this element of national policy is sometimes complicated, tricky even for inspectors. Sometimes. I think yeah, we could almost go either way on this as well, frankly. But whatever is in this plan, and I know that we are undertaking this examination on the basis of the 2012 MPPF, but insofar as there may be any difference in, let us call it the new MPPF, this policy absolutely needs to reflect that rather than MPPF 2012, if there are any. I can't remember actually if there are any big changes. Yeah, subtle though they may be, the last thing that the council wants is any complication arising from slightly different wording in the plan to in the current NPPF.
So yes, I entirely appreciate the point. There are subtle changes, Court of Appeal in Monks Hill, Gladman, all of my colleagues applying their forensic hyper-scrutiny to these words, and indeed to the footnotes. I think on that basis, there are wider reasons why we might be uncomfortable with retaining it in any event. Transposing the presumption into one's local plan is a slightly difficult approach to apply in practice. So I think we are, on that basis, favouring striking this through, and the presumption is there within national policy and will be applied by inspectors in the usual way, indeed by the council in the usual way. It is well established, see Hopkins Homes, how we are to go about that in practice. We don't need it in a policy to achieve that.
No, I mean, it's already obviously an other material consideration, and I don't think that, frankly, it needs to be set out as a matter of development plan policy.
No, so that actually introduces further complications. You get more barristers making clever arguments about whether you can achieve the presumption within the plan rather than having to go outside the plan. That's simply a bigger headache than dealing with it in the usual way. So I think that's another reason to get rid of it.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about that, Mr. Morrison.
I think clarity is always preference to mashups any time. I think it's just that difference between not allowing people to use out of date MPPF guidelines when arguing points. So I'd be happy either way.
Okay, so I take that then as a main modification put forward by the council to delete policy DP4.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else to be said about DP4? Good. In which case, then, let us go to policy DM1.
So yes, there are some changes to this. Ms Dilmamodo will run through those quickly. You don't, I'm afraid, have it in your pack.
You do have it appended to the hearing statement for this matter, and this is reflected in the proposed modification schedule, EXCYC 111. The changes that you see... So.
Yeah, if you just bear with me one moment. Yeah, okay, I have that in front of me, thank you.
Thank you, sir. The changes that you see are quite limited and were in fact discussed in phase 2 under matter 8, and the specific changes we made responded to the discussion that we had in that session where we needed to make more explicit the potential for viability-based reviews. Again, that was discussed at phase 2, and so what we've done is just pulled that modification across and reflected it in the statement. There are also some updates you'll see in there that bring us up to date with changes to the community infrastructure levy regulations that came into effect after the submission of the local plan, so some corrections to just bring the relevant text up to date in legal terms.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone here to talk about DM1, Mr. Merritt?
Yes, thank you. I have a number of points in response to the modifications that the Council has made. If I go to page 12 of the written submission at the top, ensuring efficient and affordable transport links. The first bullet point says sustainable transport including pedestrian, cycle and public transport schemes.
Sorry, forgive me, Mr. Merritt. Where were you inviting me to look?
Sorry, page 12 of 16 of the Council submission written statement.
You don't need to go there. If you use the version that you have in front of you, it's in the supporting text under the subheading, ensure efficient and affordable transport links. It's the first bullet point under that subheading. It's nearly at the end of the supporting text on this policy.
No, I don't know where I'm supposed to be at all.
Well, maybe it is then easier, sir, if you use our matter statement, which I can give you I can help you locate it more accurately then.
Paragraph 15.15, which is matter statement PDF, page 12.
Sorry, end of 15.14, I think. It's just before 15.15.
Oh, apologies, yes, 15.14, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Merritt. It's PDF page 11, so...
Right, okay, yeah, I have that in front of me now. So sorry, Mr. Merritt, if you could restart the point you were making. Now yes. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just thought it was a somewhat odd wording. I mean, sustainable transport is primarily, almost entirely going to be those particular modes that are referred to. So might it be better just rather than say including, to say focused on?
I think it's a draft.
So the answer is no. This is supporting text. We don't need to change this for soundness. They're all relevant matters. Yep. We don't need to make it exhaustive.
Yep. As I say, it just makes it sound as if pedestrian, cycle, public transport are an afterthought. That's just a funny wording. And given the priority in the NPF on those modes.
I think it's part of the wording of the original plan. I didn't write it. I don't know what was going through the mind of the person who did, but I don't think whether it's in there or not goes to soundness, to be completely honest. I must admit, I would have a preference to spelling it out, because sometimes sustainable transport is used, in my experience, a bit selectively. So it's actually quite useful to have a more serious statement of what it is.
Perhaps when that can be considered further by the Council, in that case. Yeah. Right, para 15.15.
Can I just be clear, Mr. Ridge, what you're suggesting there? Sorry, Mr. Merritt. Are you saying that the use of the word including might be a bit awry, or are you saying it needs to be changed? Or
no, I don't think a change is necessary myself. I think it falls into the category that, no doubt you could think of a more perfect way of encapsulating it, but I think what is there is perfectly adequate for the purposes of making the plan.
para 15.15, in the fifth and sixth sentences, it refers to increase in travel time across the transport network is approximately 30%, and the increase in network delay is approximately 55%. Those appear to be the figures from the 2018 transport topic paper, but that was superseded by the 2019 version, and I think those figures should be 35% and 65%. But obviously there has been the more recent visa modelling, but the report on that did not include the congestion and travel time predictions. But having looked at the data and comparing the routes that are in the previous table 15.1 and the proposed replacement 15.1, it is clear that there is a substantial increase, at least in the unweighted average peak hour travel times. So those figures, even at 35% and 65%, are actually lower than the latest visa modelling would suggest. Which of course, highlights the concerns that we've expressed in the previous hearings. If you average the morning and evening, it's 85% higher unweighted average for those routes than the previous Saturn modelling. The final sentence makes a claim that between 2001 and 2021, York's population increased substantially, but this did not lead to a proportionate increase in trip mating. I think that is completely factually wrong. If you look at the census figures, the 2001 population was 181,000, the 2021 population was 203,000, rounded off to the nearest 1,000. That is a 12% population increase. If you look at the DFT's traffic data, the trips in 2001 were 736.3 million, and using the 2019 rather than the 2021 figures because of the pandemic issue, 2019 as the last pre-pandemic issue, the figure was 983 million, and that is a 33.5% increase. So in effect, travel has been increasing 2.5 times faster than the population increasing. And again, that reinforces the concerns that we have previously expressed on the unsoundness of the transport aspects of this plan.
One for Mr. Ridge, sir.
Okay, there are a number of things there. The reason why the figures, the 30% figure for the increase in travel time across the network and 55% increase in network delay is still within this paragraph is in fact they are reflective of what comes out of the 2022 modelling, and therefore there was seen to be no need to change them, although admittedly the 2019 transport topic paper has different figures in. The numbers that come out of the network model are for all trips in York, so they're not directly comparable with the basket of corridors which is given in the big table. So you can't read across, you can't infer that one is the same as the other. So I think those numbers should stay. The information about the traffic modelling and the increase in population and the DFT traffic statistics, we dealt with this last week at some length, and we've actually issued a note which is in the examination library as EXCYC, I think it's 112, where the council puts forward its view unambiguously that the DFT figures are not, should not be used in the way that the Labour Party and the Civic Trust are using them, because they are based on estimates, and the DFT themselves in the rider to those statistics say that they should not be used for small areas and their regional statistics. Whilst I'd be happy to, maybe present 300 or 400 slides on this topic,
please don't.
Yes, I just refer you to that note. But I think the inference that traffic levels in New York have increased by 33.5%. Is simply at odds with our data. The DFT data is based on estimates. Our data is based on 24/7 traffic counts.
We know that except the point that the DFT data is not entirely robust, but it does not say it should not be used. I've read the DFT document in the covering note.
People can reach their own conclusion.
What I'm saying, please, Julian? As I say, I think there are still concerns. If the council is claiming that the visa modelling now produces those figures, I think it would be helpful if the evidence to back that statement was provided. And we can then obviously make any comments that we feel are still appropriate when the modifications are published. I think that will be quite important in terms of trying to resolve this issue and ensuring that the inspectors have a satisfactory evidence base on which to make their judgments.
So that's one I can deal with very, very shortly. It's not a question of don't use or use. We've considered all of these matters. We've used what we've considered to be the most appropriate evidence for the reasons that Mr. Ridge has already explained to you and which are in the note. Equally, the evidence is there. Everything that you need to consider this matter is in that note.
And sorry, I wanted to make one other point. The DFT data is based on traffic counts, accepting that there's a degree of extrapolation and so on from them. I don't think they should be dismissed in the way that the council is doing.
Well, I'd point you, sir, towards EXCYC 112, which contains all the relevant information, and you can draw your own inference from that.
Mr. Merritt?
I think I've made my point, sir. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else on policy DM1? Okay, which brings us then to policy SS1.
So, sir, that's not in either the patch or the matter statement. You will have to, I'm afraid, locate that elsewhere. If you're using the modifications, it is within that document on internal page 12, PDF page 12 as well. There are some changes to this. Perhaps if I get Ms Dilmamode just to run through those very quickly so they're summarised for you.
Okay, so you can see the highlighted changes are in the schedule of modifications, highlighted in yellow, where the more recent changes. There are some updates to the Gypsy and Traveller section, which are highlighted. You'll also see, in relation to the 45 target for affordable dwellings, again discussed at the last phase of hearings. So there are those two changes there. There's also reference in later sections to prioritising and making the best use of previously developed land and directing development to the most sustainable locations, and a strike through of viable and deliverable and the reuse of previous developed land. And so you can see those changes have been made there for clarity. The other changes to the supporting text were changes proposed in the 2021 modifications made to the plan.
So really, most of those are self-explanatory. We've been over these numbers in quite some detail already, but if there's specific points that are raised today, we can deal with those now.
Is anyone here to talk about Policy SS1? Mrs. Dukes.
Thank you, sir. I welcome the change that's been made in reference to previously developed land. That's something that I've brought up because there is no phasing, so the proposed change now makes a lot more sense. I appreciate that. The other matter I just wanted to raise, and this is the difficulty in how many hearing sessions we've had, and obviously this is a proposed change from an earlier hearing session, but it's just in relation to the first part of the policy that talks about to ensure greenbelt permanence beyond the planned period, sufficient land is allocated for development to meet further minimum period of 5 years. It's just to reiterate that same point. The whole point of setting greenbelt boundaries in this plan is not about the allocation of land or accommodating at the allocation land. It's about ensuring that the greenbelt boundaries are permanent because they make sense on the ground in terms of where the character of the site supports that boundary. So the idea that the council is allocating land and defining the boundaries on the basis of allocations just fundamentally is wrong in terms of the principles of why greenbelt boundaries are meant to be set in the first place. It shouldn't be about allowing land. It should be about making sure that the boundaries are permanent because they form the function of greenbelt. The second point then is just in the second bullet point, it says deliver a minimum average annual net provision of 822 dwellings. That word average doesn't need to appear in the bullet point. If you've taken the 13,152 and it comes out at 822, it's already been averaged. We then what's been tried to be introduced by the reference to average is that an average delivery of 822 will then occur, irrespective of that overall target. And it's changing the emphasis of the policy. If we look into the first bullet point, there is no mention of an average annual net provision in respect to jobs. It just talks about an annual provision of 650. So there's an inconsistency between bullet points there. And I think that word average, there's been no justification as to why it was suddenly popped up in a previous set of modifications. It just needs to be deleted. It's a minimum annual net provision of 822 dwellings, full stop.
Is it?
So I get that we took the 13,152, divided it by the number of years to reach 822. But so that is, it has been averaged in order to arrive at the annual target, but including it in that bullet point in the way it's now included then suggests that the council is only going to deliver an average of the 822, which then caps the number of overall houses to be provided. So it won't be at least 13,152 that's provided. It will be only 13,152 that's provided because they're going to keep averaging out the numbers over the years to make sure that they don't deliver more than the 822 every year. But actually it should just be that there is an annual target of 822 per year that contributes to then delivering at least 13,152 dwellings. What in effect is happening is that the inclusion of the word average means that if there's any over provision in any year, then that over provision then means counts towards the averaging that brings the target back down to the 13,152. So it's then not a leased supply, it then becomes an average supply over the period that then caps the number of houses that's provided. Does that make sense?
I was with you for a while.
Is the point that if you have a year when you provide, let's say, 1,500 houses, not 822, what I think you're saying is that if you have a year like that, then it's possible for the council to come under the 822 in previous years to compensate. Is that the problem?
It is that problem that it's managing the supply so they don't ever deliver more than that requirement. So it doesn't become at least 13,152, it becomes an absolute of 13,152, because if there's undersupply one year and then oversupply another year, they'll average it all out on a continuous basis. And if they ever exceed 822, they'll turn the supply off. And if they have less, then obviously they'll keep granting planning permissions to get up to. But in that effect, the NPPF is clear that it's about significantly boosting the housing supply. It's about making sure that there is at least a target and not an absolute target that's actually delivered.
Yeah, it's probably me being exceptionally slow, but excuse me a moment. I certainly don't quite follow your point about. I think you're saying that this in some way introduces a ceiling, and I'm not seeing that. Deliver a minimum average annual net provision of 822. I don't see how there's any kind of ceiling involved there.
But how can we have a minimum and an average at the same time? Sure, it's one or the other.
I think, and the council can correct me if I get this wrong, but I think the word average is there to make it clear that the plan isn't seeking to deliver a minimum of 822 dwellings every year, necessarily, because there will be years where maybe it's less than that, years when it's more, but on average, overall, it is 822 per year. But there isn't a kind of annual target every year. I think that's why the word average is present, or has been proposed to be added.
But isn't that the point, that there should be an annual target?
Now that's a different point.
I think if at some point in the future the council's put in the position where it needs to demonstrate what its supply is, then what's happened in previous years wouldn't be taken into account. It's a forward-looking matter. So you'd have to show that you'd have to demonstrate that there is a supply of 822 a year, looking forward, and what happens previously doesn't really matter. I mean, you might have delivered 1,500 houses in the previous year, but you still got to do 822 a year looking forward. And I'm kind of taking it that the concern is that this would be used in a way that justified taking that 1,500 that you'd done in the previous year into account. If you're still with me, extended metaphor.
I am. I think there's a really short answer, which is that we've said at least 13,152 homes.
Yeah.
So the cap idea is dead in the water because of those words. So that's the really short answer. The slightly longer answer is what Inspector Bartley said, which is we are seeking to achieve at least that number. We're going to express that as an average over the planned period. It's not appropriate to have any sort of annual target because, as we've explained through all the housing evidence and Miss Bartle's trajectories, houses don't come forward on an average basis. They never do. A plan needs time to get up to speed, then it will deliver very quickly in the middle, and then, I'm generalising, but it's a pretty sound generalisation, towards the end delivery takes on a different trajectory. That is how the market operates, and they are the parameters we work within. But an average approach is sensible in that context. It doesn't impose a cap in any sense. The 822, yes, that will form the basis for the assessment of supply. Of course, that's within the slightly artificial world of looking at 5-year house and land supply anyway. If that persists, who knows? But yes, it will. But in that context, it's really well established how one deals with either a shortfall or an over-provision. It's a matter that's been before the court several times. We don't need anything further here. That's really a separate exercise, albeit I appreciate that this examination has earlier considered supply. It's not dealing with that question here. This is just setting out that headline figure, giving it as an annual approach on an average basis, and we say it's entirely clear what is being achieved. Importantly, no cap.
I think if I'm looking at this policy without the word average in, what it commits the council to doing is deliver a minimum net provision of 822 every year. But as you've said, there are ups and downs. There will be some years when you don't deliver 822. There'll be some years when you deliver more than 822. That would be the basis for that.
So yes, and Ms Bartle helpfully reminds me from behind that actually when one looks at the evidence that we have put before you, that shows a minimum of 17,000 and a little bit over the remaining 11 years of the planned period. That's a good example of us not treating this as a cap. CYC 76, if you want the reference. So yeah, precisely as you say, that we've not looked at this as a cap. We've reflected the fact that there will be ups and downs, but we're doing so in a positive way that will exceed the 13,000.
Is that the reason why you've put the word average in there as a modification?
Yeah, yes, sir. We think it's necessary for clarity to avoid, unfortunately, the confusion that we've had this morning as about whether there is a sort of a second annual target. That's not, and I'm afraid it's a point that would cut both ways if you're a developer. If you don't look at it as an average, then you can't run any arguments about shortfall. But if you look at it as an average, then you can look at shortfall, but you can also look at over-provision, and that's the better way to do it. Whereas if it's just 822, we just say, well, we've got 822, let's not worry if we've under-delivered in the last 3 years. So it's got to be done on this basis, because actually what's really important is that 13,000 over the course of the plan.
Mrs Dukes.
On that basis, does a similar modification need to be introduced to the first bullet point in terms of jobs? Because there's an inconsistency between those first two bullet points. One talks about average, the other doesn't.
So no, because this reflects how the evidence on jobs has been produced and how it's been put before you. It also reflects the fact that one doesn't have to deal with the provision of jobs through the local plan in the same terms as one has to deal with the provision of housing. That's how the NPPF is, and we've reflected that in our approach and the evidence and the submissions that we've made to you. We're not. You just don't simply get into the same issues of supply and demand and calculation of that on the jobs as you do on the houses.
I'll leave it in your capable hands, sirs.
Can I just jump out on the Greenbelt point? That's a really quick point. It's incorrect to say that we have set Greenbelt boundaries on the basis of allocations and that somehow this is one has led to the other. That's not right. You will recall all of Miss Healy-Brown's evidence and we've taken you through all the appendices. In fact, we're going to have to return to it, I think, slightly later today on a specific matter. But part of that consideration has been, as a standalone aspect, are there features on the ground which support Greenbelt permanence? That's been a standalone consideration. That's been taken into account. Nothing has been omitted.
Can I ask a question about the modification that deals with affordable housing. Deliver at least 45% of the 3265 that are needed to meet the needs of residents and able to compete on the open market. Is that 45% figure a reflection of what's in the paper that was put in? Is that where that comes from?
That's correct. EC CYC 107/2.
That reflects what we were discussing with Mr. Elvin about the issue about headcount.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. As long as I'm understanding the source correctly, that's fine.
Okay, is there anything else on policy SS1? Mr. Merritt.
Just want to say I think our written submission covers the key issues that we still feel have not been properly addressed, but I won't make any further verbal comment than to draw your request your attention to what we've said. Thank you.
So we've addressed all of those issues at various, probably multiple different points through this examination. I don't need to repeat that to you today. We've looked at it. We don't think it requires any changes as a result of what's said there.
Okay, thank you for that. Just anything else on SS1 before I move on? Okay. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is to take a short adjournment and then look at matter 1, that's Greenbelt boundaries, and it's section 8 of the Greenbelt boundaries that we will be considering when we return. So I make it 10:46. I adjourn the hearing to resume at 11:05. Thank you.